he said, of course, if Philip had stayed in the Navy, there would have been great competition between you. I don't think the competition would have been very strong, actually. He would have got it.
Do you think so?
Oh, yes.
Royal duties were now his first priority. But the Duke maintained his interest in Britain's maritime heritage. And on the 50th anniversary of the end of the war, he was quick to leave the royal podium to march alongside his old comrades. A look back there at the lasting importance of the Royal Navy for the Duke of Edinburgh. Well, the Queen is the patron of the Royal Commonwealth Society, and in a statement this afternoon, they paid tribute to the Duke. Through his extensive support for charities and organisations across the Commonwealth family, as well as his countless visits with the Queen and individually to Commonwealth countries, the Duke of Edinburgh championed and celebrated the wonderful diversity and many achievements of the Commonwealth's 2.4 billion people. We can speak now to Linda Yu, who's the chair of the Royal Commonwealth Society. Hello there, Linda. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a fact well known, the dedication that the Queen feels towards the Commonwealth, but this was shared by the Duke of Edinburgh.
Very much so. The Duke accompanied the Queen on all of her 251 overseas visits, and about a third of those were to Commonwealth countries. So the two of them had traveled and visited every Commonwealth country except for two, Cameroon and Rwanda, which is a late entrant. And looking at the Duke's patronages, the kind of charities that he supports, he supported over 800 charities, but about 260 of those, about a third, were also in the Commonwealth. So I think that gives a sense of the importance of the Commonwealth in his charitable work, and certainly his presence, and why we say he will make a lasting impact on the Commonwealth.
Did you, in your role as chair of the Royal Commonwealth Society, have much to do with the Duke? And if you did, what were your interactions with him like?
I had the privilege of meeting him when he accompanied the Queen on a couple of events in 2016. So this is the year before he stopped doing formal duties, as it were. And he was always very engaged, very interested in finding out what our current projects were. I've also seen him interacting with Commonwealth diplomats as well as with charitable figures. And in fact, the last engagement that I interacted with him at was at Buckingham Palace for the Queen's Commonwealth Canopy, which is the first environmental project in the Queen's name. And this is to get all 54 Commonwealth countries to commit to protecting greenery for the future. And this environmental interest is, of course, very high in terms of the Duke's own work. He was, after all, the first UK president, the first president, I should say, of the WWF UK. And so throughout these interactions, he was, and you can imagine with all the people they meet, he was always very interested in the details and in asking me about how I was finding doing volunteering and charity work for the Commonwealth.
So that, in a sense, brought together two of the Duke's passions, the Commonwealth and the environment.
It did. And I would also say another notable contribution that he made among many to the Commonwealth is through the Commonwealth Steady Conferences. So he brings together about 300 young emerging leaders. So you also see this other theme coming through of youth and community. And they meet every 6 years in a Commonwealth country. The next meeting is due to be held in Canada in 2023, where they undertake a study tour. So you bring people from the charitable sector, from industry, from government, and what he wants to do is for them to do community service, to network beyond their usual groupings, and to do that, to develop their leadership skills. And I think that's going to make another lasting impact, this real sense that what makes the Commonwealth quite different is that it's the people-to-people interactions amongst 2.4 billion people. So it's not just the governments, but it's the community, the young leaders sharing their work in areas like the environment, like building connections to help their community. So I think that came through very strongly in all of the Duke's work. And certainly when I think back to the last trip that he took with the Queen to a Commonwealth country, which was Malta in 2015 for the heads of government meeting, the Queen said that she was indebted to the Duke for all of the work that he's done for the Commonwealth, much of which perhaps doesn't get mentioned as much as her work.
It's a very interesting picture that you paint, because some people may have seen the Duke of Edinburgh as being a fairly formidable character, a forbidding character even, and no doubt he could be that on occasion, but clearly behind the scenes there was a great deal of very hard and very worthwhile work that was going on.
Yeah, absolutely. My encounter with him is that he was extremely engaged in my describing what our work was with young people, with in terms of the environment, in terms of building community. And in fact, one of his other main charitable legacies is the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. And that's also present in about 41 Commonwealth countries. So you can see his sort of very long-standing, I think, commitment to getting people out to do volunteering, to do service. It probably does help that he was, quite a figure. So if he were to hand you an award and say, well done, it does mean quite a lot. In fact, one of my staff got the Duke of Edinburgh Award. And then 2 years later, she started working for the Royal Commonwealth Society and was interacting with the royal family, doing an event at St. James's. So he certainly changed her life. She could have done anything. And she's still with us, working in the charitable sector for the Commonwealth.
That's a very nice story. Thank you so much. That's Linda Yu there, the chair of the Royal Commonwealth Society. Thank you for sharing your memories. Well, tributes have been pouring in to the Duke of Edinburgh, and in the past few minutes, Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury, has paid this tribute to the Duke.
My first reaction was to think of Her Majesty the Queen, and to feel a deep sense of sympathy and compassion for her and for the whole family at the loss of such a gigantic figure, particularly in her own life, married for well over 70 years, 73 years. I think I heard today that there's only 5% of the population who were alive, who have been alive longer than the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh have known each other. So that was my first thought. I think, secondly, to feel an extraordinary sense of what a remarkable life. What a wonderful life of service, of duty, of service to his country, service to the crown, but with this formidable intelligence, insight, and a really extraordinary prophetic gift.
You've met him in your role as Archbishop. What impression did you have of him from those meetings?
Well, I think, as I say, the impression that comes across most clearly is of a man of profound intelligence. Very practical, extremely down to earth. But the moment you were into a conversation with him, you began to realize how widely he'd read, how deeply he thought, and in particular in conversations I had with him, how deeply he thought about issues of theology. But also the distinctive thing, which I think has been coming out in a number of things people have been saying today, is he had an almost prophetic gift of being not just a few years ahead of the curve, but in so many areas, whole decades ahead, quarter of a century, half a century ahead, on issues like conservation, issues like climate change, interfaith dialogue, motivation for young people. I mean, he was talking about it when he was being laughed at for it. And half a century later, people are saying, oh, it's really important. Don't know why nobody thought of it before. He thought of it before.
You mentioned interfaith relations. He was a man of faith as well.
He was a man of very profound faith. I preached in front of him on more than one occasion, and you knew that one of the most interesting bits of preaching when he was present was the questions you'd get from him afterwards, which showed that he paid intense attention. And he would push back and question and examine in a way that wasn't intimidating, but really had you on your toes. This was a man who thought profoundly about his faith, and it was a very deep faith, a very solid faith. And when we talk about interfaith, he would communicate superbly with people of other faiths without any compromise to his Christian commitment.
There are a lot of tributes today to his character, and you said in your statement earlier today that he was an outstanding example of Christian service.
Yes. There's a theme that runs through the words of Jesus Christ, which is summed up in something he said, Jesus said. If anyone wants to be my disciple, they must take up their cross and follow me. Prince Philip literally followed the Queen, always a couple of paces behind. That's how it is. That sense of following while bearing, at times I suspect that I don't get this firsthand, but from other things he said, the quite considerable burden of never being the number one is an extraordinary sign of disciplined humility when your talents are that great, combined with just following what was right, and in his faith following Christ as he followed the Queen.
You mentioned the longevity of his service. What would you say to those who feel shocked and perhaps a bit unstable as a result of the news today?
I would say it's Easter time. And at Easter we remember above all the resurrection of Jesus Christ, that Jesus Christ was raised by God from the dead. Death is not the end. There is something enormously impressive about a life lived well and ended well. And Prince Philip sums up a life lived well and ended well.
The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, there with his thoughts about the Duke of Edinburgh, his life and his legacy. Well, if you are just joining us, we are broadcasting a special programme following the death of the Duke of Edinburgh. In a statement, Buckingham Palace said, "It is with deep sorrow that Her Majesty the Queen announces the death of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss."
A song by Paul Beckman, Palu song. Ode to Prince Philip.
This is a BBC News special programme following the death of His Royal Highness Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, at the age of 99.
E, A, and B.
Prince Philip was by far the longest serving consort in British history, a role that he shaped from
April
the
9th,
start.
2021. by Paul Beckman,
try
Palu
and
song.
grow into it, and that was by trial and error.
Ode to
There was
Prince
no
Phillip.
precedent. If I asked someone what you expect me to do, they were
Ode
blank.
to
No idea.
Prince Phillip.
Much idea.
He was 26 when he married the then Princess Elizabeth in 1947. Within 5 years, she would be queen.
He has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
Prince Philip.
Tributes to the Duke and messages of condolence to the Queen have been sent from leaders around the world, including here in the UK.
We mourn today
The whole
with Her
world is
Majesty the
saying
Queen.
goodbye to you.
We offer our
Missing you and
condolences to
sending you off
her and to all
well.
her family. And we give thanks, as a nation and a kingdom, to the extraordinary life and work of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
In recent years, there'd been signs that Prince Philip's health was declining. He'd been admitted to hospital a number of times throughout the last decade. He recently returned home to Windsor on the 16th of March after a month-long stay in hospital.
Ode to Prince
His last will be
Philip.
felt most
Ode
keenly
to
by
Prince
the Queen,
Philip.
his family, and
Ode
beyond.
to Prince Philip.
People have been laying flowers outside the gates of Windsor Castle, where the Duke passed away peacefully this morning.
Ode to Prince
The
Philip.
flag is flying at half-mast in Buckingham.
Most flags around the world are gonna be flying
Philip's
half-mast
funeral will take
again.
place at St George's Chapel in Windsor. We'll be reflecting on his extraordinary life of service and duty.
Oh, to Prince Philip, what we owe you, yeah.
Hello,
Thanks
if
for
you
your
are just
service
joining
and
us,
good
we
deeds
are
you've done
broadcasting a
throughout your
special
life.
programme following the death
Sat
of the
there
Duke
in
of
England with your
Edinburgh. In a
beautiful
statement,
wife,
Buckingham Palace
Queen
said, "It
Elizabeth,
is
yeah,
with
oh,
deep
to
sorrow
Prince
that Her
Philip,
Majesty
we're
the
gonna
Queen announces the
miss
death
you.
of her beloved husband, His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. His Royal Highness passed away peacefully this morning at Windsor Castle. Further announcements will be made in due course. The royal family join with people around the world in mourning his loss. We will have continuing coverage and tributes to the Duke of Edinburgh, but first, our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell looks back at his long and eventful life.
First after them, her husband, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, who with his hands between the hands of the Queen, becomes her liege man of life and limb, and of earthly worship, in the name
At
of
the
God.
Queen's coronation, he was the first person after the bishops to pay homage to her. Philip knelt before his wife and pledged his loyalty.
And so, rising, touches the crown upon her head, and kisses her upon the left cheek.
As a male consort to a female sovereign, Philip had no constitutional significance. Yet no one was closer to the monarchy or of greater importance to the monarch than he was. By instinct he was a leader, yet Philip had always to take second place. By nature he spoke his mind, and that sometimes got him into trouble. Yet for decade after decade, his was the support that mattered most to the throne. Philip was born in Corfu in 1921. His family was part